So today we're going to talk about Light Galaxy. So Light Galaxy hasn't really received any new support in a little while, not since it received its new boss monsters in Extra Plasma and Eternal Galactica Oblivion. But this deck is still really good. So one thing you will probably immediately notice looking at this deck is there is one card from the new set in here, which is Legend Strike. That's because a lot of the replays that we're going to show are us using this card, but it's only the one card. It's not like a huge deal. If I wasn't playing this, I would just include a couple extra copies of Universe Storm, maybe take out the Legend Magician for another copy of Klein or anything else. Basically, it doesn't really change the feel of the deck, and it just goes to show that even when new support comes in, this deck can still play pretty much the same. So I guess we'll start in the extra deck since this is a fusion deck. Eternal Galactica Oblivion, so fantastic boss monster, 3500, and the key, most important thing about this card is that it can be made using Galactica Oblivion and any two Light Galaxy type monsters, and most of our deck is Light Galaxy type monsters, which means we can have easy access to this card at pretty much all the time. So we can shuffle 5 Galaxy type monsters from our graveyard into the deck, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Until the end of this turn, this card cannot be destroyed by your opponent's trap card effects and also gains attack equal to the number of monsters in your graveyard times 300. So really good card for dealing with things like Mirror Force, and it can boost its attack to insane numbers and smack someone for a crap ton of damage, which can become piercing using our Transamu Raikou. The only downside to Galactica Oblivion is a little bit vulnerable to Magic Cylinder, so you have to kind of work around that, but other than that, fantastic boss monster. The other interesting kind of boss-ish monster, although it's a lot less of a boss monster, much more of like a utility monster, is Space Fusion Extra Plasma, the big boat. So we can send the top 2 cards of a deck to the graveyard to destroy 1 card in the opponent's spell and trap zone. So very, very strong. We can use this to kind of clear the way and then just kind of end the game with Galactica Oblivion. But again, this is made using Extraplora, but also any one light attribute galaxy type monster. So again, very easy to get it out because we do not need specific requirements, just the one big boat. The last fusion monster that we can actually summon is Galacticara Fuse Eve. So made using Galactica Eve and 1 light galaxy attribute type monster. So again, can be made quite easily. Place 1 fusion from your graveyard on either top or the bottom of the deck. Obviously, when the turn we fusion summon this, we will have a fusion in the graveyard because that's how we got it out, so we can always get this effect off. We can draw 1 card, then we can special summon 1 galaxy type normal monster from our graveyard face up to our field. So very, very strong. That means what we can do is we can have Galacticara Eve, any other monster, plus fusions, fuse into Fuse Eve, then use Eve's effect to get back fusion and then get back any of our other cards, so Transamu Raikou or Galactica Oblivion, because it has to be a normal monster. And if we take back Oblivion, we already have Oblivion, Fusion, and Fuse Eve all on the field, which means we're now just 1 monster away from being able to easily climb into Eternal Galactica Oblivion. So really, really cool. Or if we don't want to do that, or if we don't have to do that, we could also just put the fusion to the bottom of our deck and just draw a card. We could draw it into some sort of good out. If we're looking for like Monster Reborn, we're looking for Secret Order, we're looking for Universe Storm to get rid of cards, we're looking for back row to try and prepare for our opponent's counterattack. There's just so much we can do with this deck, which is why it ends up being so much fun. So main deck, Galactica Oblivion. So there's not really much to say about this card. It is a vanilla after all, but it is 2500 attack and 2500 defense, which means turn 1 we can just tribute set this, and 2500 defense is really difficult for your opponent out a lot of the time. So can just be a really good roadblock, because when it's face up, it is a lot easier to deal with. You have a lot more cards that can target it while face up, so face down is always the way to go. Transamu Raikou, 1600 attack, is also really good. Just being able to have a decently sized body is always going to be a plus, and because it's a normal monster and a level 4 or lower like Galaxy, it works with a lot of other cards in the deck. Next up, Extraplora. So we can send the top 2 cards of a deck to the graveyard. This card gains 300 attack until the end of this turn. Then if you have 5 or more Galaxy type monsters in your graveyard, you can add up to 1 Galaxy type normal monster and 1 fusion from your graveyard to your hand. That means that if we have Transamu Raikou in the graveyard, we can take back fusion and Raikou, and then bam, we have an Extra Plasma, which is really, really good. Being able to do all of these little combos allows us to just continuously gain advantage, continuously be able to summon out bigger monsters, and continually get off all of their effects, which is great. Next up, Mirage Dragon. This is just always going to be a fantastic card. Stopping traps in the battle phase is really good because when we're trying to make a push with Oblivion, we need the back row gone, so we want to be using things like Extra Plasma, we want to be using things like Universe Storm, we want to be using things like Legend Strike, and Mirage Dragon is just another one of those cards. Turn off your opponent's Magic Cylinder so they can't blow us out. Next up, Transamu Raikou War to Zen. So War to Zen is a pretty cool card, and it works in conjunction with our next card, Lightwave Dragon. So Lightwave Dragon, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard, up to 3 face-up monster opponent's field, lose 1500 attack during the main phase only. But if we have War to Zen, and we have another face-up light attribute monster with 400 less attack, which guess what? Lightwave Dragon fulfills that requirement, we can destroy one face-up monster with 1500 or less attack on your opponent's field. So with Lightwave Dragon, we can reduce anything that is 3000 or lower to 1500 or lower, which means Transami Rhynak War 2 Zen can just pop them, which is fantastic. Being able to get rid of any threat with just a 2-card combo is really, really important. Next up, Legend Magician. It's really good because we want to get our normal monsters in the graveyard as soon as possible, because a lot of the cards that we have function by using our normal monsters from the graveyard, either bringing them back, adding them back to our hand, or doing, anything with them. But also, we can use it as a target for Legend Strike to pop a back row. So just a really good versatile card. We're only on the 1 though, because this deck is a little bit tight, and we don't want a lot of non-Galaxy monsters in here, because then it makes it harder to fusion summon. Next up, Barrier Statue of the Inferno, another decent card. Stops your opponent from being able to special summon, obviously stops us from special summoning as well, but sometimes being able to force your opponent to find an out to this card is going to be really, really important, and is level 4, which means again we can bring it back with Legend Strike. Transami Rhynak is another really good card. We send a card from our hand to the graveyard, which can be good to unbrick us if we do have a lot of pesky level 7s in our hand, but then we can target one of our monster and it inflicts piercing damage, which is really, really good. On top of that, if we have Transami Rhynak face up on a field, we can change the battle position of one face-up monster on our opponent's field, which again can be really important. If your opponent has a really high attack monster that has maybe lower defense, we can change the defense mode and then pierce over it, which is really good. Next up, Transamu Crayon. So if you have no other monsters on your field, add one light attribute Galaxy type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand. This turn you can only attack with Galaxy monsters. So this is a really good card to get back Rhynak and then either try and go for a fusion play or just use them as tribute fodder for Oblivion and Extraplorer. But we could also sometimes bring back Oblivion. It's not going to come up too often, but there will be some situations where tribute summoning out will be worth it. And then finally, Galactica Eve. If you have no other monsters on your field, send one Galaxy type monster with 1600 or more attack from your hand to the graveyard. Send this card from your field to the graveyard, draw one card. Then if you have 3 or less monsters in your graveyard, draw one card. So a lot of the time this is only going to be relevant on turn 1. We can send it and one of our normal monsters to the graveyard to draw 2, which sets up our graveyard a little bit and can draw us into a more playable hand. So sometimes this card will come up, but obviously it's also half of our kind of most useful fusion. So very, very strong card. Next up, Ship of the 7 Treasures. So we do have only 6 targets for this, but when we use things like our Eternal Galactica Oblivion, we will be throwing some of these back into our deck, which means Ship of the 7 Treasures should always be live. And, Ship of the 7 Treasures is also a unique card in that we can discard non-level 7s anyway, so it's always going to be live anyway, but we want to get maximum value out of this card if we can. Legend Strike, fantastic. Pay 300 life points, special summon one level 4 monster with 1600 or less attack, or one Legend normal monster from your graveyard face up to your field. Then if we summon Legend Magician or a Legend normal monster, we can destroy a spell trap on the opponent's field. So again, we have a lot of targets for this because this deck does play a lot of 4s. We can bring out Rhynak, we can bring back Mirage Dragon, which again, really, really important. We can bring back War 2 Zen if we already have Lightwave. We can bring back Lightwave if we already have War 2 Zen. We can bring back Legend Magician and pop a card. We can bring back Barrier Statue if we feel that we need to floodgate our opponent. We can bring back Rhynak if we need to go for that push, but we don't have the piercing. There are so many cards that this card works with that this is a perfect fit for this deck. Next up, Fusion. Obviously, we have to play 3 because it's a Fusion deck, but this deck, unlike a lot of other Fusion decks, gets a lot of ways to recycle this card, which is really, really cool. Being able to just add this card back without having to lose anything is always fantastic. Next up, we're on just the 1 Universe Storm. That's because we have the 2 Legend Strikes already, which can be used as Spell Trap Hate, and this deck's already getting a little bit tight in space, so we're just using the 1. Monster Reborn, this is a Fusion deck, which means a lot of the time we're going to want to bring back our Fusion materials, or bring back the Fusion monsters themselves, or bring back something from our opponent's graveyard. Now this slot could be something like Dark Hole, and have more interesting outs to a lot of things, but Monster Reborn is better consistency tool a lot of the time, which is why we're going with it. Next, we have 2 Secret Order. Again, we only have the 1 target in Galactica Oblivion, but it is kind of the cornerstone of the deck. We're always going to want to be using it. It brings Galactica Oblivion out with an extra 700 attack, so 32 is pretty good and can't be destroyed by traps, and we can then go from there and use it for fusion plays. There's just so much we can do in this deck, which you'll get to see during the replays. And then Nobody Scat Thief is just probably the best generic trap we have at the moment. It's fantastic to sort out our hand, to try and start our turn with a lot of cards in hand, to blank a lot of damage. This card just kind of does everything. And then the best trap in the game is Magic Cylinder. Fantastic. It's always going to be good. There's very, very few times when this card is bad, so it's always going to be in it. Next up for this side deck, so we have the Aquillas. Basically, we're going to bring this in if we run into something like Excutie. We're not maining this because this deck doesn't need to play the aggro style. We have the giant guy that gets piercing, so we don't need to worry about getting lots of monsters out of the way. We are on 1 copy of Lampyrus. This is in here in case we run into the mirror. It can be really useful to just snatch one of your opponent's monsters. We are on the Ghost Cyclones in case we're going second. We might choose to bring this in. We are on the Cell Block 5 and 6. This is in here specifically for the Harpy matchup, but can be okay into some other matchups. It's okay. okay into Wind Warriors, it's okay into Cyber Dragons, but it's not super great. Probably won't bring it against those decks, primarily just for the Harpies. We have Christ at Sacred Tower. This is a good kind of catch-all for a lot of different decks. This isn't specifically good against any one meta threat, but can be okay against a lot of like kind of tier 2, tier 3 decks. We are on Buffered Slime. This is specifically good against Cyber Dragons. We are on the Word Workings. This is good against a ton in the meta right now, so if we could fit it in the main, we would. We have the Dragonline Pit Trap. Again, there are some decks we really want to stop a lot of cards when they're summoned and not when they're going into battle phase, so we'll bring this in. And then finally, the Torrential Tribute, which again is going to be brought in something like Harpies that can turn off our battle traps. So this is the deck. It's very competent, it's very fun, it's very consistent a lot of the time. Now obviously this deck can still brick. No deck in Rush is ever going to be immune to bricking. I mean, Excutie try their best, but even they can brick sometimes. So overall, I would say this is a solid tier 2 deck. I don't think it's quite tier 1, but it has the capability to end the game. The win condition is very clear. You summon out Galactic Oblivion, boost it up, turn off your opponent's traps, or get rid of all of their back row, give it piercing, smash your opponent in the face. It kind of is very simplistic, but that kind of adds to its charm, and it's very, very enjoyable to play. So let's fire into some replays, and I can show you what I'm talking about